So hello everyone, welcome to the event tonight. We're CASH, Campus Atheists, Skeptics, and Humanists. We're a student group on campus that focuses on critical thinking from a non-theistic perspective. We're really looking forward to the debate tonight, and we're looking forward to having the opportunity to explore new ideas and to question our own. So, thank you.
On the other side, we have Building Blocks. Building Blocks is a grassroots organization that provides a platform for Muslims to put into practice Islamic principles that advocate community building, working for the common good, and helping those in need. Islamic tradition is not only focused on ritual acts of worship, but also strongly emphasizes the importance of social justice and responsibility. Quote from the Quran, in which it says, "O you who have believed, bow and prostrate and worship your Lord and do good, that you may succeed." And likewise, it is mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, once said to his companions, "What actions are most excellent?" Then he was asked, "What actions are most excellent?" And the Prophet Muhammad replied, "To gladden the heart of a human being, to feed the hungry, to help the afflicted, to lighten the sorrow of the sorrowful, and to remove the wrongs of the injured." It is these fundamental principles that we seek to emulate. For more information, we encourage people to visit thebuildingblocks.org. Thank you.
Tonight, our moderator will be Ian Shore, who recently earned his PhD in philosophy from the University of Minnesota with a dissertation entitled The Reward of Virtue. He recently returned as a lecturer in the philosophy department as well. His primary academic interests include moral theory, political philosophy, and the work of David Hume. I'd like you all to give a big warm welcome to our moderator, Ian Shore.
Okay, so I'll just give you a rundown of the schedule for the evening, and well, first introduce the speakers. So Dan Marker started out as an evangelist at the age of 15. He received a degree in religion from Azusa Pacific University and was ordained to the ministry in 1975. He preached for 19 years before gradually outgrowing his religious beliefs, and he's written several books about the experience. These include Godless, How an Evangelical Preacher Became One of America's Leading Atheists, and most recently, The Good Atheist, Living a Purpose-Filled Life Without God. He's now the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation and co-hosts Free Thought Radio, a national weekly show on the Air America network. He also gives lectures and participates in debates around the country, and tonight he's excited to participate in his 97th formal debate. And Hamza Tzortzis is a public speaker on Islam, a researcher, a writer, and an activist. Hamza has debated various academics and intellectuals and delivers presentations on topics ranging from does God exist to can we live better lives without religion. Hamza was brought up in London and attended school and college in the area. He studied psychology at the University of Westminster and went on to study Western and Islamic philosophy. He is married with 2 children. So those are the debaters. The format of the debate will go like this. We'll have opening statements of 20 minutes each. Hamza will begin. Following the opening statements, we'll have a series of rebuttals, sort of in reverse order. So Dan will begin with the rebuttals. First an 8-minute rebuttal, then a 5-minute rebuttal from each. And then we'll have 7-minute closing statements. After the closing statements, we'll pause so that people can leave if they want. You need to pause because the room is not convenient. So we'll pause for a few minutes while people leave. Those of you who want to stay for the question and answer period, we'll do question and answer until 10 o'clock. The way the question and answer period will work, you should all have an index card. Right? How many people lack index cards? Some. Do you want to pass them around? Well, the idea is you should write down your questions as they occur to you in the debate, the questions that you would like to ask. When we pause after the closing statements, we'll pass the cards up and select some questions, as many as we can fit, before 10 o'clock. And we'll break up at 10. For the participants, we have this handy timed color-coded card system. Green means 1 minute remaining in your time. Yellow means 30 seconds remaining in your allotted time. Red means stop speaking as soon as possible.
I'm colorblind.
Okay, I think then we're ready to begin. The first statement will be Hamza's opening statement of 20 minutes. Yeah, enjoy.
إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري وأحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Brothers, sisters and friends, I greet you with the warmest Islamic greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Which basically means may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you for coming tonight to address a very important question. And I'm going to address this question by saying that Islam is more rational because it makes sense of the existence of God. Islam is more rational because it makes sense of the miraculous nature of the Quran, which is the book of the Muslim. Now, Islam makes sense of the existence of God because we have all asked the same questions. Why does something exist rather than nothing? Where did the universe come from? Now, in response to this question, some atheists have claimed the universe is a brute fact. It's eternal. It just is. However, to maintain such a proposition, I argue is untenable because there are very good reasons that the universe was brought into being. In other words, it began to exist, its past is non-eternal, it is finite. Now, to substantiate this claim, we can bring to our discussion 2 points. Point number 1. The absurdity of an actual infinite history of past events for the universe, and number 2, Big Bang cosmology. Now, the universe must be finite because it is absurd to postulate that the universe has an actual infinite history of past events. Let's take the following example to illustrate this point. Now, imagine I'm an American football player, and before I could pass the ball to one of my teammates, I have to ask permission from my coach. But he has to ask permission also. And if this goes on forever, will I ever pass the ball to my teammate? No, I wouldn't. And this highlights the absurdity of infinite regress of causes. And this applies to events too. Therefore, there cannot be an infinite history of past events to the universe. In light of this, the famous German mathematician David Hilbert, he said, "The infinite is nowhere to be found in reality. It neither exists in nature nor provides a legitimate basis for rational thought." Also, the universe must be finite because modern cosmology concludes that the universe is not infinitely extendable into the past. It must have had a beginning. Now, according to modern cosmologists, the hot standard model of the Big Bang is where physical time and space were created and matter and energy were created at a point which the cosmologists call singularity. And clarifying this, John Boslow, the author of Stephen Hawking's universe, he states, "It was not just matter that was created during the Big Bang, it was space and time that were created. So in the sense that time has a beginning, space also has a beginning." Now, there are other models of the Big Bang, such as the oscillating and the vacuum fluctuation models. These has arisen as a result of an assumption of an eternal universe. But modern cosmology has told us that there are principles within these models that necessitate a beginning to the universe. And some of these principles include the second law of thermodynamics, metastability, and acausal fine-tuning, something we could discuss if we get technical in the Q&A. Thus, the Big Bang model describes our universe as having a beginning a finite time ago. As Alexander Vilenkin, one of the world's leading theoretical cosmologists, says, "With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape, people." He didn't say people, I said people. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, in light of this, there are three possible explanations. Number one, the universe came out of nothing. Number two, the universe created itself. And number three, the universe has a cause. Now, we know the universe couldn't have come out of nothing because, frankly, out of nothing, nothing comes. This is an undeniable philosophical principle. This is why the philosopher B.J. Tzortzis, in his publication About Time, explains, if there is anything we can find inconceivable, is that something could arise from nothing. We also know the universe couldn't have created itself because that would imply a paradox. Just imagine your mother giving birth to herself. I know it's messy, but it's an impossibility. Also, philosophically, it would imply that the universe existed and didn't exist at the same time. Therefore, the best explanation is that the universe has a cause. Now, this doesn't mean it's God. It doesn't mean it's Buddha, Allah, and it doesn't mean it's Dan Barker, right? It doesn't mean anything. What it means is that there's a cause. But upon conceptual analysis, which basically means let's think hard about this cause, let's think critically, using our rational faculties, we will come to some striking conclusions. Now, since this cause created the universe, which includes time and space, I would argue it must be one. Because if we follow Occam's razor, which enjoins us not to posit causes beyond necessity, entails that this cause must be one. Also, it must be uncaused due to the absurdity of infinite regress of causes, as we discussed with the American football example. Also, this cause must be immaterial, which follows the Quranic paradigm of laysa kamithlihi shay. There is nothing like the Creator. He is transcendent. Because since this cause created time and space, it must therefore transcend time and space, which really means transcend the material world. It must be powerful, because it created the whole universe. It must be intelligent, as it created all the laws in the universe, and a lawgiver or lawmaker implies intelligence. Significantly, this cause must be able to have a relationship with the material world because it has a will. Now think about this. Since this cause is uncaused and therefore eternal, and it brought into existence a finite effect, it must have chosen the universe to come into existence, and a choice indicates a will, and a will indicates it can have a relationship with conscious beings within the universe. Now what we've done, just by reflecting upon reality, we've concluded what the Quran, which is the book of the Muslims, concluded 1400 years ago. As God says in the 112th chapter, say, He is God, the one, the only. God, the eternal, the absolute. He begets not, nor is He begotten, and there is nothing like unto Him. Now before I get to my second argument, that the Quran is a miraculous discourse, I really want to basically have a new conversation with you guys today. I want us to be in an emotional, intellectual space where we can connect with each other. So I want to deal with some, what I would argue, outdated atheist cliches concerning this argument, so hopefully we can move along positively. And contention number one is quantum physics undermines this argument, because there is a claim that particles come from nothing and that subatomic events do not correspond with causality. So things can begin to exist without the cause, and things can come out of nothing. Well, firstly, the quantum vacuum is not nothing. It is something. It is a sea of fluctuating energy. It has a rich structure and obeys the laws of the universe. Like philosopher of science John Polkinghorne, he states, it's not nothing. It's a structured and highly active entity. Also, there are deterministic perspectives adopted by physicists. For instance, the David Bohm interpretation being one of them. As Polkinghorne states, Bohm's theory, there are particles which are unproblematically objective and deterministic in their behavior. Contention number two. If the actual infinite is not real, then how can God be actually infinite? Well, listen to the argument. When we say the actual infinite is not real, we mean an actual infinite of discrete segments. The infinity of God is to be understood in terms of an undifferentiated infinite entity. Let me make this a bit more simple. The infinity of God is qualitative and not quantitative. It has nothing to do with an infinite set of definite and discrete finite particulars. Contention number three. Stephen Hawking, the renowned physicist, in his new book, The Grand Design, has shown, apparently, that the universe can self-create. It can come from nothing. Well, he states in his book, because there is a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. But first and foremost, if we read this book properly, his view of nothing doesn't mean nothing. It means the quantum vacuum. And we've already discussed that the quantum vacuum is something. It's a rich structure, it's a sea of fluctuating energy. Also, concerning the law of gravity, well, that's just a mathematical equation that describes nature. And it basically is the force of attraction between material objects. Now, if you're assuming that to be in place before the universe, but the universe has to be in place for gravity to be in place. So what Hawkins is telling us, that the universe existed in order for it to bring itself into existence, but that's, again, like saying your mother gave birth to herself. It's a paradox. The final contention. The universe can't have a cause, because the universe is the beginning of time, and to claim such a thing would be tantamount to saying, what's north of the North Pole? Now, this firstly assumes that you need physical time for causality. This is not true. I would argue the claimant has to prove this. Take the Big Bang, for example. The initial singularity of the Big Bang is not considered to be part of physical time, but constitutes a boundary to time. However, cosmologists say it's still causally connected to the universe. So what this shows is that even though physical time didn't exist at this point, there is still a causal connection with the universe. So by analogy, God's act of creation can be the same. In other words, it's prior causally, but not prior in time. Now, let me go straight to the second argument, which is Islam makes sense of the miraculous nature of the Quran. Now, first and foremost, let's define some things here. What do we mean by miraculous, by miracle? Now, the word miracle comes from the Latin word miraculum, meaning something wonderful. Now, the old ironclad definition of miracles, the David Hume definition, if you like, was a violation of natural law. But I think this is incoherent, because what's a natural law? A natural law is just an inductive generalization of patterns we perceive in the universe. Now, if something transcends the pattern or changes, doesn't mean it's a miracle. Maybe we haven't been looking hard enough. And this is why the philosopher Belinsky observes, so as long as natural laws are conceived of as universal inductive generalizations, the notion of a violation of a natural law is incoherent. So I would pose an Islamic philosophical point here. Islamic thinking states that a miracle is an act of impossibility. Once we have exhausted all of the possible naturalistic explanations, then it's a signpost to the transcendent and signpost to the divine. And to substantiate this for the Quran, I would use two arguments: the unique literary form of the Quran and the way the Quran describes natural phenomena. Now, the Quran is a thinking book. It teaches us to think. For instance, it says, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, in Arabic, meaning, do they not use their intellect? Do they not use their minds? But the Quran goes further than this and challenges mankind with regards to its authorship. And this challenge is with regards to its unique literary form. And this has a historical context, because the Arabs at the time of revelation 1400 years ago were the best at expressing themselves in the Arabic language. So they were Arabic linguists par excellence. But they failed to challenge the Quran. They couldn't imitate the unique literary form of the Quranic discourse. As Foster Fitzgerald Arbuthnot, who was a notable British Orientalist and translator, states, and that though several attempts have been made to produce a work equal to it as far as elegant writing is concerned, none has yet succeeded. Now, the Quran's literary form de-scopes what we know of the Arabic language, because the Arabic language can be divided into various literary forms: rhyme prose, also known as saj'a, straightforward speech, also known as mursal, and poetry, which have to adhere to the 16 rhythmical patterns known as the al-bihar. Now, we know the Quran is not rhyme prose, because rhyme prose has certain definable features, and the Quran transcends these features. As Devin J. Stewart, the famous Arabist, in his essay Rhyme Prose, which can be found in the Encyclopedia of the Quran, has shown that the structural features of Quranic Arabic differs from rhyme prose. We know the Quran is not straightforward speech because it has assonance, it has rhetoric, it has eloquence, and these are not the features of straightforward speech. We know the Quran is not poetry because none of the totality of each of the chapters of the Quran adhere to the rhythmical patterns of poetry. This is why Muhammad Khalifa, in his publication, The Authorship of the Quran, concludes, Readers familiar with Arabic poetry realize that it has long been distinguished by its exact measures of syllabic sounds and rhymes. All of this is categorically different from the Quranic literary style. And it's no wonder the scholar and Arabist A.J. Arbery, he states, "For the Quran is neither prose nor poetry, but a unique fusion of both." Now, how does this make the Quran a miracle? Well, the reason the Quran is a miracle here is because when we go to the nature of the event, which is the Quran, the nature of the event, which is the Arabic language rather, and we exhaust all possibilities of the 28 finite letters, the finite grammatical rules, and the finite words, we cannot create the literary form of the Quranic discourse. And this shows that it's an act of impossibility. It is no wonder Professor Bruce Lawrence, in his book The Quran, a biography, says, as tangible signs, Quranic verses are expressive of an inexhaustible truth. They signify meaning, layered within meaning, light upon light, miracle after miracle. Now, my second argument to substantiate that the Quran is a signpost to the divine is its descriptions of natural phenomena. For example, the scholar Maher Ali, in his book The Quran on Orientalists, he says the Quran is not contingent on a 7th century worldview of natural phenomena. For instance, the Arabs at the time, they believed that the mountains used to keep the sky up. The Quran doesn't reflect none of this 7th century worldview. And I'm going to use, for instance, a stage in the development of the human embryo as described in the Quran. Now, the Quran mentions the word nutfa. Now, according to the classical dictionaries, like Lisan al-Arab and academic dictionaries like Lane's Lexicon, this word can mean a singular entity which is part of a bigger group of its kind, a single sperm from a collection of millions of sperms. It can also refer to one female egg from a group of many other eggs in the ovaries, and it could also mean a drop of fluid. According to the prophetic traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, explained nutfa as a combination of fluids from the male and from the female, and they're both responsible for genetic material. Now, the Quran elsewhere describes the nutfa as a mingled entity from other entities. And think about this very carefully. All this multi-layered meaning of one concise word is in line with modern embryology and physiology. For instance, embryologists John Allen and Beverly Kramer in 2010, they state the human individual arises from the conjugation of two minute structures called cells, one from the mother and one from the father. These are called gametes. Together these gametes form a single cell, the zygote, from which the entire embryo, including its surrounding membranes, grows. Now, how do we explain this, since the nature of embryological knowledge was based upon the works of Galen and Aristotle? And Galen and Aristotle, they had absurd views with regards to fertilization. Galen, for instance, said only the sperm has the faculties, meaning the sperm is responsible for the genetic material. We know this is false. Also, Aristotle had another absurd view. He said the sperm mixes with the menstrual blood. But the word for menstrual blood in Arabic is hayd. It's not nutfa. So the Quran actually goes against a 7th century worldview of describing natural phenomena. So where did he get this from? When we exhaust naturalistic explanations, he couldn't get it from Aristotle. He couldn't get it from Galen. He couldn't get it from Hippocrates. He couldn't get it from any of the medics at the time. Where did he get it from? This is an accumulative case to support that the Quran is from the divine. I would also like to add that this process also describes a physiological process. For instance, we know that these cell structures that form the zygote have to be contained in fluids. And we knew, as we just discussed, that the word nutfa actually also means fluid or a drop. Interestingly, sperm have to be contained in semen, and the ovum or the egg have to be contained in oviductal secretions. And this is recent findings in physiology, that the oviductal secretions support the process of fertilization. So again, we ask the question, how is this in line with modern science? This book should be a reflection of a 7th century worldview, but it's not. And we could give many more examples during the Q&A. I really want to entertain a positive discussion with you guys, inshallah, which means God willing. Now, just to end, I have one more minute. I like to say that, look, this is not just about intellectual gymnastics. This is about who we are as human beings. Especially you Americans, right? Always claim about freedom and the pursuit of happiness and liberty. Very important concepts. But I want to raise something here. How do we achieve true freedom? An American writer once wrote that being born is like being kidnapped and then sold to slavery. And that's so true because we're just a reaction of a biological and social circumstance. You didn't choose where you were born. You didn't choose your parents. You didn't even choose your siblings. You didn't choose your DNA. You didn't choose the economic circumstances you were brought up in. You're shackled to these. So how do you attain true freedom? In Islamic spirituality, we say the way to free yourself from this social biological conditioning is actually to worship God. And by doing that, you free yourself from the slavery of your own desires and the slavery of the reaction to social biological processes. And hopefully we'll discuss this a little bit more in the Q&A and maybe transcend some of the intellectual gymnastics that I've been practicing so far. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Hamza. Like every other Muslim I know, you're a very kind and very articulate person, and obviously also very educated. It's a real pleasure to know you. And thank you, Ian, for moderating. Thank you, Cash. Thank you, Building Blocks, Chelsea, and Jeff. Thanks for all your work on this. I used to believe in God. I was a minister of the gospel for 19 years. When I was a kid, raised in a Christian family, I thought, how lucky was I? I was born in the right family, in the right religion, in the right country, in the right time of history. I felt like I was in the front lines for Jesus, and it felt so real, and I believed in it. I got goosebumps when I used to pray, and I used to feel the presence of God in my mind, and thinking all the while goosebumps were evidence of the Holy Spirit, when actually goosebumps are evidence of evolution. Did you know that? Why do we get goosebumps? Because our hairier ancestors used to fluff up their fur when they were cold or when they had to scare off a predator. Muslims say there is no God but Allah. And I have to say that I agree with the first 2/3 of that sentence. Atheism is the absence of a belief in God. Atheism is not a positive moral philosophy. It's not a positive philosophy at all. It is simply the absence of a belief. There is a subset of atheists who do take it a step further and claim they do believe there's no God. But basic atheism is simply not believing in a God. Since there's no evidence for a God, it is rational, therefore, not to believe in such a being. Since there is evidence that religions are natural human creations, it's not rational to insist, in the absence of evidence, that any particular religion, such as Islam, is a supernatural exception. During my rebuttal time, I will tell you exactly what's wrong with the arguments that Hamza gave. He's well-meaning and he's articulate, but he's wrong. His arguments are stretches. But first I want to make my own case here. What day of the week is it today? Thursday. What does Thursday mean? We have a day of the week devoted to a god named Thor. There were people all over the world, millions of people, good people, who were born into a religion of this sky god, thunder god named Thor, and they lived their lives worshiping this god, and they died worshiping that god. And that god was apparently influential enough that we have a day of the week, at least in many countries and many languages, named after that god. Who caused the thunder? Who caused the lightning? Who caused all those things to happen? Thor did, or Zeus did, or name your god. But now that we know more about weather, now that we know more about electricity, that gap is closed. That God is no longer necessary. That God is now just the name for a day of the week. Is there anybody in this room who worships the god Thor? Anybody? No? Anybody in this room worship the god Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican god? Anybody here? Millions of Mexicans, millions of Indians down there worship that god. No? Anybody here worship or believe in the goddess Diana? The huntress goddess of Greek? No? Nobody here? Millions of people believed in that god. Any people in this room worship the God of Abraham, as described in the Bible or in the Quran? Any people in this room? Oh, there you go, we've got some. Well, the only difference between you and me, then, is that I just believe in one less God than you do. You are atheistic when it comes to other gods. You are skeptical when it comes to Thor. You are probably a skeptic when it comes to the angel Moroni. In fact, there's historical evidence for the angel Moroni and Joseph Smith, much more recent than Muhammad. And I would like to ask Hamza if you believe in the existence of the angel Moroni. In fact, the Mormon church has some miracles. The Mormon religion has, how do you explain the existence of the Book of Mormon? It's unique literary style, you know, where it came from. Of course, there are natural explanations for the origins of these writings. So, all of us in this room are skeptics. All of us in this room are doubters. Hamza is a skeptic and a doubter of the religious claims of others. Islam, in its basic meaning, is submission. You submit to the authority. But how can that be rational? When rationality and reason require the free exercise of your mind. You can't be a rational agent as you are required to submit to some dogma, to some doctrine, to some religion. It is not rational to start off by saying that we must submit. Submitting is wrong. Submitting is slavery. Yes, Hamza is right that we all come prepackaged with genetic predispositions, and much of our nature, at least 50% of it, I think, is predetermined, and we're stuck with it. But we have a frontal lobe. We do have the ability to transcend some of our nature. And this frontal lobe and the rational process that we all have rises above those instincts, rises above even the culture and the history of the religions that we were raised in. The reason I am an atheist is pretty simple. First of all, there's no evidence. If there were evidence, think about this. If there really were evidence, it would be on the table. It wouldn't be something as flimsy as the existence of the Quran and supposed miracles of the way the Quran is worded. If there really were evidence for a God, by now, somebody should have won the Nobel Prize for pointing that out. Think about it. If there really were evidence, anyone, any scientist, any skeptic, any doubter, anybody would bring it forth and say, here we go. We have positive evidence for a God. I'm also an atheist because there's not even a coherent definition of a God. What is this God made of? How can a spiritual being exist? Sometimes the definitions that are given, I've debated other Muslim scholars. One of them said, God, Allah, is infinitely merciful. I think most Muslims believe that. God is, in fact, isn't that in the very beginning? God is all merciful, ever merciful. And he said, but God is also infinitely just. He is all just. Well, that's impossible. If you have a God that's defined as infinitely merciful and infinitely just, if that's your definition, that God does not exist because it cannot exist. What is mercy? Mercy is distributing punishment with a less degree of severity than is deserved. Mercy means that you let someone off with less punishment. What is justice? Justice means that people get punished with what they deserve. That's what justice is. You don't send a kid to jail for stealing cookies, right? You have a certain sentencing and punishment for a crime. So if Allah is infinitely merciful, think about this. If He's infinitely merciful, all merciful, ever merciful, then there's no need for hell. I can't go to hell if Allah is infinitely merciful, right? Because infinite mercy means no matter what the crime is, even disobeying Allah, even refusing to submit to Allah is one of those things that would be covered by infinite mercy. Therefore, it is a contradiction in Islam to claim that Allah is infinitely and ever merciful, and yet there's still a hell to punish those of us who somehow escape that mercy. If God is infinitely just, then He can't be merciful. So if that's your definition of a God, that God cannot exist logically, rationally. Of course, different theologians and different religions have different definitions of a God, and they tinker with them. Even within Christianity, they have to tinker with omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience to make and with the problem of evil to try to make this God palatable to. But if God is defined in mutually contradictory ways, then we can say not only is there no evidence for such a God, it'd be like arguing for the existence of a married bachelor. Can a married bachelor exist? No, it self-contradicts. So I have yet to see a coherent definition of Allah or Jehovah or a spiritual being that makes any sense to know what we're even talking about. And of course, there's no good arguments for a God. This first cause argument that Hamza gave, I will talk about that during rebuttal time, is not a good argument. It's basically a God of the gaps argument, but it's even itself internally contradictory. There are other arguments that people have brought forth, ontological, design, teleological arguments, and all of them, as Bertrand Russell once said, they all boil down to bad grammar. The arguments for God just don't hold water. If you look at them, if you scratch beneath the surface and look at them and unpack the words, they fall apart logically. And there's no agreement. If Muslims could agree with each other, and they don't. I've even heard Hamza say that there are different interpretations of the Quran, and different scholars differ on this. Well, if the Quran is such a perfect book, why are there differing interpretations? Why are there disagreements? Why are there factions? And within Christianity, why are all these different groups arguing over the same so-called Holy Scripture? I used to preach the Bible was inspired. What Paul wrote in the Bible, God is not the author of confusion. But can you think of a single book that's caused more confusion than the Bible? And look at the Quran. There's no agreement among believers about many of these principles. Of course, in general, there is some agreement. But if I were a God and I wrote a book that was so sloppy and so open to misinterpretation, I'd be embarrassed to release it to the public. And of course, there's no good answer to the problem of evil. If Allah and God is all merciful and all caring and all good, all you have to do is walk into any children's hospital and you know there is no God. Parents who are desperately praying for this miracle. Hamza believes that miracles can happen because they're impossible. And yet these children die at the same rate as anyone else. If prayer were really answered, if faith in Allah really made a difference, we would see it, we would measure it. It does not make any difference. A belief in Allah makes no difference except in how much money you might give or how much... If you are weak enough in your moral principles that you need a religion to motivate you to be kind and to help the poor, well then maybe in that case, keep your religion. We'd rather have you good to the poor than not. But millions and millions of good non-believers in this world are charitable. They give to the poor, they give to charity, they help people out without using religion as an excuse. And of course, that's the final point. There's no need for a God. Millions of people live their lives with purpose and meaning, with joy, with love, without having to bow down. As Paul said in the Bible, he was a slave of Christ. And of course, as the Quran says, we are all submission. We are all having to submit to the will and the authority of this person who created us. We've sometimes heard it said that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. I don't think that's true. I think the absence of evidence it's not proof of absence, but the absence of evidence is indeed evidence of absence. In fact, you can hold it in your hand. For example, suppose there were a bomb scare, and we all had to leave this building. And the authorities came in, and we were all standing outside waiting. And the authorities went through the whole building, and then they finally announced, okay, it's clean, you can come back in. Would you come back in? Would you have proof that there's no bomb? Probably they would go through the building, they would probably make a checklist or a chart or something, and they would look in all the trash cans and all the drawers, and then whatever they would certify the building is clean, right? Would you have proof of absence? No, but you would have evidence of absence. That chart you could hold in your hand would be evidence of absence. The same thing happens when we look for a God. If a God existed, the universe should be different in some way. There would be some way that we would note it. But as we look through the universe, as we go through the trash cans and the drawers, and we look everywhere, we see a universe that looks as if there is no God. We actually do have evidence of absence. In fact, Victor Stenger, the physicist, in his book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, says If God is a hypothesis that's carefully defined, then it fails. The existence of God fails all tests. One of the reasons, there are many reasons why Islam is not rational, and one of them is that the Quran is based on hearsay. We have hearsay testimony, which would not stand up in a court of law, that a man named Muhammad went into a cave and he got some words to recite. Recite. The word Quran means to recite. In fact, I think the very first recitation, correct me if I'm wrong, Hamza, historically was that God created humans from a blood clot. That's the word that I have in one of my translations. Other translations say other things. And by the way, different translations of the Quran contradict each other. And I have two different versions, and sometimes the same verse is translated different ways in the English. Arabic is not that strange of a language. Arabic is a language like any other. All languages have problems with translations, but Arabic is not that special. It's a wonderful language. It's unique, but all languages are unique. When you translate from Spanish or when you translate from Greek, when you translate from Arabic, you're going to have some problems. But if there is an all-knowing, all-caring God who cares about this message getting to us, then why wouldn't He make it so that the translations would be understandable to all of us? What we do know about the Quran is that it was written by human beings. And what we do know from history is that human beings make mistakes. Whoever put that book together was a human being. Was it Abu Bakr who gave the canon, the original canon for the Quran? Was just a guy. Why do we take his word? Why do we think his word is special? He's just a guy, just like the people who wrote the New Testament. They had a religious agenda, and everyone claims the New Testament has these irreproducible miracles too. The Book of Mormon has these miracles, and look at all those things. They're just people. They're just human beings. I think Hamza agrees with me that someone like Joseph Smith, although he claimed to be inspired, he claimed to have found in this hole in the ground these golden tablets, he was just a human being who exaggerated. He made mistakes. He was wrong. He misinterpreted. The people who put the Quran together were human beings. Human beings make mistakes. They made a mistake with the Quran. The Quran has verses that are contradictory within it. It can't be a perfect book if it has verses that contradict each other. One example, there is a surah that says that hell is eternal. Hell lasts forever. But I read another surah, if I can find it, if you want me to look it up for you, it says, no, hell doesn't last forever. It lasts as long as the earth lasts. So there's a contradiction. And a perfect being who's writing a perfect book would not have put verses in there which contradict each other. And that's just one example. Now, if I were an Islamic scholar, I would say, well, I can interpret and reinterpret. But then there's the problem. Why does it have to be interpreted and reinterpreted? Why can't it just be clear? The Quran is not clear, just like the Bible is not clear. And I think one of the main reasons that the Quran is not a rational book is that instead of using reason and argument to make its point, the Quran uses a threat of violence. Hell is a threat of violence. Stephen Prothero, who was reading through the Quran, says, this is not amazing literature. This is not special literature. He said the Quran reads like a fire and brimstone sermon from start to finish. Let me give you some examples. We have prepared for unbelievers a shameful punishment. I'm the unbeliever, okay? This is talking about me. You Muslims who think this is a wonderful book, it's talking about me. I'm a non-believer. Those who disbelieve our revelations shall be cast into hell. And when their skin is burnt up and singed, we shall give them a new coat, that they may go on tasting the agony of punishment. For God is almighty and all-wise. So the believers will laugh at the infidels on that day, regarding them from their cushioned seats. So you're going to sit on a cushioned purple couch underneath the fig trees with these dewy-eyed young women sitting next to you, and you're going to be laughing at me for having the temerity to think my own thoughts and disagree with your... I'm an infidel. I'm a non-believer. Your book is arguing from a threat of violence to me. And that's what the Quran is. Believe or burn. Believe or burn. If you don't believe, you're going to suffer. Any system of thought that has to make its point with a threat of violence is morally bankrupt. And if you hold that book under your arm with any pride, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be able to make your point using pure reason and not touting a book that has a threat that my skin's going to be burned off my arms And it's going to be regrown so that Allah can burn it again and again while you're sitting up there laughing. Are you proud of that? Do you think that is rational? Do you think that is kind? Do you think that is good? If you do think so, and if your God does exist, and if He did create a hell, then I would say to Allah, you created hell, you go to hell. You're not worthy of my respect. In fact, I will never submit to a being who is so irrational that he has to make his points with a threat of violence. And I think you're better than that. I think you're kinder than that. I think you've risen above the brutality of your own book, in spite of the primitiveness of the book that you believe in, to be a good person. And I salute you for that. I applaud you for being a good person, in spite of Islam. So during my rebuttal time, I'm going to quit now, I think there's 1 minute left. I will explain what is wrong with his first cause arguments. Thank you.